Hello and welcome to the Smells Like Infinite Sadness podcast. I'm your host, Michael Taylor. For those of you who don't know, I run the website, smellslikeinfinitesadness.com. It's a blog covering the best alternative rock from the 80s and 90s up to present day. I'm a proud middle-aged Gen Xer who is still obsessed with the music of his youth and loves to talk about it. But if you've been following my blog and this podcast, we also discuss films in our Smells Like Cinematic Sadness portion, where we discuss the best and bad films. We've also covered the Fantastic Fest and film festivals and the like. And this week, we're a little bit behind because we've had some things going on, but we like to take the time to celebrate the legacy of the late actor Rutger Hauer, who passed away 2 weeks ago at the age of 75. Rutger Hauer was a cult classic actor for my generation, Generation X, was in some very landmark films, including Blade Runner, The Hitcher. He was even in later films like Batman Begins and Hobo with a Shotgun, so he's had a pretty long storied career. He's never what I would consider a household name, but he was always a great presence to a film, always kind of the hidden element as a supporting actor. Was a lead on some occasions, but was primarily a supporting or character actor. Anyways, so this week we're going to look back and look back on his legacy, discuss what he meant to us, and give him a send-off, even though we're a little bit behind. So rest in peace, Rutger Hauer, and please enjoy this piece dedicated to his legacy. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Normally when we talk about films, we talk about films that are so bad they're good, and we're still doing those, but we kind of wanted to change course this week because last week was the death of Rutger Hauer. Rutger Hauer was a Dutch actor who was in a ton of cult classic films of the 80s and 90s, and he was still going strong until he passed away last week at the age of 75. If you grew up in our generation, you know him from Blade Runner, which we're going to touch on heavily. He was also in films like The Hitcher, Ladyhawke, Nighthawks, two films with the word hawk in it. He played vampires and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and several other vampire films. So he had a pretty wide-ranging career, although he's kind of known for playing villains, but he's played everything from heroes to villains to everything in between to character roles. So we kind of just want to touch on his career.
And low-budget sex films from the 70s.
Yeah.
Some of his start.
Yeah, he was, a big part of Paul Verhoeven's early career. They worked together. It was like Turkish Delight, things like that. And I believe I read that he was originally considered for the role of RoboCop. I think I read
wow.
that.
That would have been pretty amazing. I mean, what was it? Peter Weller, was that the actor who did
Peter
it?
Weller.
Peter Weller. Yeah, I mean, he did a great job for that character. But I would love to have seen Rutger Hauer in that. That could have made a whole different dimension to it. But
definitely so. And I think it's worth noting that Blade Runner took place in 2019. His character died in 2019, and here he did pass away in the year 2019, which is it's a very eerie piece of irony.
Yeah, it's really quite like poignant in a way if you were thinking about that character and his sort of dying monologue there at the end. It's quite strong as far as like Rutger Hauer's been in, I have to look up the exact amount, but hundreds of films in some capacity, and some small roles and just bit parts and things throughout his whole career. And so that line of what he's seen. I've seen attack ships off fire off the coast of whatever it was. I can't remember the line exactly, but just this thought of like all of these things he's seen and done. I mean, just from a film career perspective, is pretty dense and amazing. So I think that would have made Roy Batty proud. Yeah,
I mean, I guess our first exposure to him was Blade Runner. I'm trying to think if I saw him in that film before that.
Well, I think our parents took us to see Turkish Delight when we were 5. No, I think Blade Runner was the first that I really remember seeing him. But again, because of some of his smaller roles and things, I may have seen him earlier in something, but it just didn't register. It really wasn't until Blade Runner and that performance and just that film in general that really sort of sticks with you from our generation. I think especially males from our generation. I think this was sort of one of those characters that sort of also digs into some of the male psyche a lot of, sort of you know, at the end of days, your end of life, and all of these things, looking back, and you know, so I think this is one of the things I think men struggle with a lot. I think everybody struggles with that, but I think men struggle with that a lot, about their achievements and what they've done in their dying days, you know. So I think that really strikes a chord with a lot of men from our generation, because this is one of those first sort of you feel very sympathetic towards him, because as his character, you know, it's you know, you see his flaws and all of his you know, designs, which are, you know, would be seen as flaws, but actually you know, for that character was quite well rounded, you know.
Yeah, and I think Blade Runner is one of the kind of films that it changes for me every time I watch it, because as I get older, because when I first saw the film when I was a kid and I saw it in theaters, I never forget going with my dad to the theater with he and another friend, and we walked out, and it was the original theatrical cut where it ended with Harrison Ford and Sean Young driving through like the sunshine, yes. And my dad's like, "Why the hell were they there the whole time? Why they stay in that rainy, depressing place? Doesn't make any sense." And
I never thought of it that way, but yeah. Leave it to your dad. He always had those.
Yeah, he was like, "What's the point of it? Why are they stuck in that depressing place? They could have just gone to this wooded nice area." And I think Blade Runner was one of those films that, like, for some reason kids got it, you know, yeah. And a lot of adults didn't. It was a very weird summer of '82 because there were two films that came out the same weekend: Blade Runner and The Thing.
Oh, yeah.
Both of them bombed at the box office. Both of them had, you know, very lukewarm critics' reviews, skewed negative. Yeah. Both of them got their ass beat by E.T., which was still playing.
Yeah.
And E.T. just stomped their ass because it was a totally different film and it was much more family friendly.
Yeah, definitely.
But now, you know, you look at it, two of the best sci-fi films of the '80s are The Thing and Blade Runner.
Yeah. I mean, both of those films have such this isolated feeling. Even though Blade Runner takes place in this huge, you know, metropolis, everyone's so isolated and insulated, and you know, just there's not a lot of interaction with just that is not sort of business-like. You know, I mean, all the characters, it's really just, you know, it's no interactions for pleasure. Even Decker's interactions with Sean Young, those, you know, at some point they become a little more personal, but they were, you know, in the initial phases were just quite clinical and quite you know, procedural, because this was his job. So and I think even with The Thing at that time, it's, you know, the aspects of it as far as being isolated and not a lot of you know, choices to escape from the situation was played heavily on that. I think in the early 80s, like 82, with the Cold War and all of the things going on with us growing up, you know, it was, you know, sometimes that felt like there was no escape from all the madness, you know. So I could see where these dystopian, you know, looking back now, why these films have such a resonance with the people who kind of missed it in the beginning, missed that sort of aspects of it in the beginning, and just when you look back at the 80s now, I mean, that's all the 80s were kind of about. It was kind of dystopian in a way, you know?
Yeah, it was a lot of stress going on, and I think that those films really encapsulate on it, and they both still hold up so well because the themes are still so resonant. But
and also they hold up so well because of what we're going to talk about, the acting. I mean, the acting in both of those films are impeccable from just about top to bottom. I mean, you know, everybody in The Thing was just on point. I mean, the whole film, and also Blade Runner. I mean, with Rutger Hauer's performance in Blade Runner is just, you know, amazing as far as the depth he could bring to that character. So, yeah, I think besides the overall script writing and direction, which were all great for both those films, really the acting for both of those films are what I think makes it stand the test of time as much as anything, you know.
And the thing about watching it as a kid is that with a kid you watch it and you're more like, Rutger Hauer is a bad guy, and you don't really have much sympathy for him. You're just like, you know, get him. But the older you get, the more you get a sense for his humanity, for lack of a better word, because because he's trying to live as much as he can in a very few years, and he acts rings around his co-stars who are, all do fine jobs as replicants, but he really gets to nail it home.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. in that closing monologue when he's on the rooftops with Harrison Ford after Harrison Ford has shot him and he's mortally wounded, and he goes to that monologue, which is entirely, got to mention this was written by Hauer himself. It was not in the script.
Yeah.
And it is one of the most amazing monologues you'll ever see in a movie. And I mean, talking about memories like Tears in Rain is just, it's so poetic.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, for me with Blade Runner, of course, when I first saw it, and I think I didn't see it initially when it first was in the theater. I think I saw it as it was coming into its end run in the theater. So I think I saw it later on in its run while it was still in the theaters. But I remember distinctly, the things that drew me as like a, I don't know what, like 11-year-old kid or whatever, when I was watching it, 12 years old, 11 years old. I mean, of course, the visuals first pull you in. And but once that character of Roy Batty was on screen, I mean, I think that was one of the first times where it was really you couldn't look away, or you didn't even want to look away. I mean, this was a character that was you could tell the way he was portraying it, that there was such an underlying sort of pain and despair underneath you. I mean, even just in his eyes, from like the way he would convey certain things. And I think for me, oddly enough, even at that age, that monologue was one of the high points of that film for me, because it just struck me, the thought of what happens with all of these memories you've accumulated and all these things after you die, the things just sort of lost like tears and rain. And I mean, I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, well, I mean, I want to be able to have that kind of monologue when I'm dying, to say like, I've seen this and I've done this, these sorts of things. And I think it really sort of resonated with me, like that, as opposed to the characters like Decker and the others who were still kind of stuck on world, Roy Batty actually sort of lived a more full life like that, because that is kind of one of the things for me that was really struck me even in the first time seeing that, was that monologue. I mean, I love the film in general overall, and Decker, he was just such a badass, but it's something about the depth of emotion in Roy Batty that was quite unique, I think. So that always stood out to me, and I think that's always something that I look for in villains now, is because of Rutger Hauer's performances. I look for villains that have some humanity and some sort of sympathetic identification with, and I think that always makes such a more interesting villain character, rather than just somebody who's just evil or pure evil, or having these other ranges of feeling and thought really makes a villain memorable, and sometimes even more frightening for me is when they show these signs of humanity, because then you start to then you can no longer identify the villain as just the evil out there, or the bad, bad whatever. You have to kind of look at it as, well, shit, there's a lot of bad in everything. There's a lot of bad in everybody, and people are struggle with it, and people fight with it, and that's the way the world is. So it kind of, that I think because of his character and because of his acting performance, that this really kind of brought that home to me for when I'm watching films and looking at villains. That's kind of what I look for, to be a well-rounded, impactful villain, if you will. So
yeah, because he was, and let's not forget, he was scary too. I mean, when he was, he was a very menacing character, and if you've ever seen his films, like if you ever watched The Hitcher or Nighthawks, I mean, he could play a really creepy. I mean, The Hitcher was another really great role for him, because he was basically stalking C. Thomas Howell across the desert. And
well, C. Thomas Howell now wishes he had stalkers.
Yeah.
His career, stalking his career.
so he was really mortifying in that, and he just, his eyes, he could just do such a cold hard stare that was just very intense and intimidating, I think.
Yeah, I think, I mean, overall, just his ability to convey like that darkness and evil was while still maintaining some semblance of humanity, and without being a caricature of like evil or these sorts of things. But you see in a lot of movies also these days, these caricatures of evil. They're just basically like a cliff notes of evilness. It's not really like, they're not being in depth with the character. So but he always seemed to have that behind his eyes and behind his face when he was performing, that even if the character as written was not necessarily so deep, you could kind of garner a lot of that from Rutger Hauer's performances. So.
And he had a very interesting way of looking. I remember I read an interview with him for the Hitcher when it came out, and he said it's my version of E.T. He's like, I'm like the alien, and C. Thomas Howell is like Elliot, and I was like, what? I still don't understand what the hell he's talking about, because it's a buddy film. It's like, it's about. Yeah. I was like, I guess.
Yeah, I'd have to read that. Maybe he was being he had quite, from I've seen with interviews and other things with him, he also had quite a sense of humor, like quite a rather dark and sort of subdued sense of humor. He may have just been one of his little dark jokes, and saying like, well, yeah, this is my version of E.T., it's like the buddy. So I have to read more about that to see what his intention of that. But yeah, if he was being serious about it, I don't see the correlation, but yeah.
And I'm glad that he got some roles towards the end too. I mean, I thought, even though there are bit parts in like Sin City or Batman Begins, it's like those were fun little roles. And Hobo with a shotgun was kind of like his last, I think his last like really enjoyable film. Like, as far as playing a lead part, 'cause it was just so over the top and weird and violent. And so he was still going strong. But Blade Runner is definitely the one that you can keep going back to and back and back. And I thought the sequel was great, but I definitely missed his presence. Obviously they couldn't bring him back since he was gone, but it's like he left such an imprint on that. And I think, and I have a feeling that his performance probably informed the sympathetic view of replicants in the sequel, because I thought a lot of people, I thought the people who play the replicants in that film definitely had a human side that, and I think they must have drawn some inspiration from.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that I'm not sure if like you said, when the film first came out, that it kind of got overlooked by moviegoers and critics, and a lot of people just kind of overlooked it. So I think as more people saw it over time, and as sort of society changed and circumstances in the world changed over the last 30 years or so, then it sort of informed the narrative of those characters a little better. So when they made the sequel, it was kind of like, well, yeah, the humanity of these characters is a big part of, and and this feeling of your time running out. And I mean, that's not a new concept in sci-fi. I mean, you've got that happened in quite in many films, where either the protagonist or someone has a finite amount of time, as far as like, I mean, you think of like Logan's Run or movies like that, where the characters are sort of on a timetable as far as their life and death. So that's not necessarily a new concept, but what was done with it as far as being so intimate and personal. And I think most of that has to do with Rutger Hauer himself, which makes it so powerful. So.
Yeah, I think so. And, we'll miss him. He was a great performer. He did some great films, and the nice thing is they'll always be around to revisit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I only regret that I never got to see a film with him and there's a Malcolm McDowell. Is it Malcolm McDowell? And what's the other shock-haired?
Terrence Stamp.
Terrence Stamp. That would have been a pretty badass trio right there. You get those three together for a film. I would have loved to have seen that, because those guys were very similar in sort of their style in certain films, which I always thought those three together would make a really, really interesting combo to play off of each other. But alas, that won't be happening.
Yeah, but now's the time to go back revisit his filmography. Definitely watch Blade Runner and The Hitcher for sure. You can find Escape from Sobibor, which is a really cool miniseries on CBS. It aired in the 80s about escape from a concentration camp. He was great in that. And I'm going to go find some films that I haven't seen by him. I've read about films like, I believe one's called Flesh and Bone. It's kind of a sword and sorcery thing. Blind Fury, I want to check that out. We should also give a little shout out to Wanted Dead or Alive, which is a total cheeseball film. If you haven't seen it, it's got Gene Simmons playing a terrorist, and Rutger Hauer as a bounty hunter based off a Steve McQueen TV series. But I'm gonna spoil it, so if you don't want to know that, then you can turn the podcast off now. But the big scene is the end where he brings Gene Simmons back, and he gets a bonus if he brings it back alive. So he brings it back to the person who, I think it was a police force, and he says, he has a grenade taped in his mouth, and he's like, gives it back, and then he's like, says something to him, and he's like, "Fuck the bonus," and he pulls it out, and you see Gene Simmons' head blow off, and then it's him walking down a grassy knoll, and people yelling at him. He starts playing a harmonica. It's so random.
Yeah.
I believe that was like a Canon film or like one of those.
Oh yeah.
Golden Globus or one of those films that got like a straight to video release. But as a kid, I thought it was fun, but I'm sure it hasn't aged well. But he ran the gamut, and he was definitely memorable in it. So
yeah, great.
So Rutger Hauer, fare thee well. You will be missed like tears in rain.
Yes, definitely.
And the fact that you passed away the same year as your character in that film is really strange and poignant. And I'm sure once the film's, I believe the film. You remember what month the film took place in?
I don't remember because
I think it's the fall.
Because the set design, it was just rainy the whole time and dark, so you never really get a concept of.
But I'm sure whenever it gets like its proper, retrospective this year, people celebrate it. That'll be a big part of it, because losing him was a big loss.
Yeah, so it's not looking forward to the in memoriam portion of the Oscars today to see Rutger up there, but it's a shame.
They better not screw it up either. They better not forget him. They do it all the time. It's so embarrassing how they're always screwing that stuff up.
They forget somebody. There's always somebody that they're
So they better get it right.
All right, sounds good. So. All right, thanks you guys for listening, and we'll be back with something at another point. We'll be back to our shitty movie lists and
yes. We've had a lot of personal stuff come lately between the both of us that's kind of delayed some things, but we'll be back on track soon. So we've got some good crap films coming up, so we'll get back on track on that. But until then, next time, watch Blade Runner and keep reaching for the stars.
And Turkish Delight with your hankies, your tissues, and lotion.
Yeah, give that a whirl and see how you think about that. That'll give you a whole new appreciation for Rutger Hauer. It's some crazy shit.
Or maybe not. I mean, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't vouch for it.
Yeah, me neither. But give it a whirl, and we'll see you guys next time.